Welcome to Art Talk. I'm Patricia Shippee, your host of Through the Eyes of the Artist, a program that focuses on art from a human perspective by getting to know the artists, their attitudes, their motivations, and even their lifestyles, all the things that influence their personal artistic expression, giving us an opportunity to understand and to vicariously participate in the creation of art, and to see our world through the eyes of the artist. Today we are going to look at a world which Werner Pfeiffer expresses in multimedia as structured chaos, a combination of logic and manipulation. Here we are going to see a merging of a variety of art languages into his newest format, the book as art. Gessoed, painted, tortured, gagged, bound, and mutilated books, and discuss the issues of electronic technology and censorship in relationship to books, which Werner describes as endangered species. Let me tell you a little bit about Werner before you meet him. Born in Stuttgart, Germany, Werner received his art training as a printmaker and graphic designer at Stuttgart's Academy of Fine Arts. He emigrated to the United States in 1961 and is a professor of art at Pratt Institute in New York. His paintings, prints, and sculpture have been exhibited in museums and galleries in the United States and throughout Europe. In addition to numerous sculpture commissions, Werner's work is also in many public collections, including the Mattituck Museum, the Museum of Modern Art in New York, the Delaware Museum, the Library of Congress, and others. Welcome to Art Talk, Werner.
It's a great pleasure to be here.
Good, me too. Well, you know, you've always been manipulating color and shape. Is that a result, do you suppose, of your design background? But I also wonder, did you study mathematics or architecture?
No, I have absolutely no know-how and knowledge of neither mathematics nor architecture. I'm fascinated by architecture, but mathematics, I think, is sort of the underpinning of a lot of our technological life today. And when you look at the environment we live in, it's all geared by mechanical and technological gadgets and things. And I think the base language there is mathematics. And so I'm fascinated by it, but I really, in a way, am awed by it at the same time because I don't understand it. And that's sort of the input, I think, in my work. You know, so
okay. Well, I wondered about that because in your work, and we're going to talk about it a lot today, and we're going to go in a minute to your home, contradictions. There's always contradictions. There's such structure and then color and joy, but we're going to come back and talk about that. But first, let's go see a little bit about your environment.
Okay.
see a rug here that you also designed. This is part of one of the books, isn't it?
Right, right. It brings us back to the book concept. This is called For Further Information, check the next page, and it's all sealed and nailed down, you know, for footnotes. See next page. And the piece you see here on the right-hand side is essentially, I call it split book stack. And it's a book that's mounted on a pedestal, and then I nail it against the wall. And and above it there's a piece that is essentially a falling cascade of books, and with ropes knotted in between. And the bottom is a little construction. This rope leads up to a hanging book stack, which is essentially sort of a vertical bookshelf, the way I call them. You know, they're all books nailed together and glued together, and they sort of hang suspended from the ceiling. So there are little decors all over the house, you know, showing the book outside the bookshelf.
Outside the shelf, yeah, that's a whole nother
exactly.
thought. Yeah.
This is a small sculpture shelf piece. And here we go back to the shelving in the library, and this is a drawing, actually, a charcoal drawing. I've started experimenting with dimensional drawing, where the drawing becomes really a sculptural piece itself, and it's collaged together in a frame structure. And you can see the fragments of paper and they're mounted together, so that it gives a depth to it. And this is also a construction, a dimensional. I'm very concerned with dimensionality of work. You know, this is a painting on paper, and I mounted in a shadow box. And you see some maquettes on the side. And above that is a little figurine. It's a little piece that my daughter made.
Oh, the ceramic?
Yeah, the ceramic piece. And
dancing
lady.
lady.
She's a very gifted little artist in her own right.
Another artist
in
the
right,
family.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, Werner, I want to talk to you about metamorphosis in your work, because for me, there's been a metamorphosis from very joyful, playful, colorful, three-dimensional prints, the traditional print, and now into a very cerebral form of art, an almost in-your-face provocative form of art.
Right.
So tell us about the metamorphosis that's occurred here.
Well, it's in a sense not a sudden thing. You know, it happened parallel to my other work, and I'm still doing that color work. I'm doing the sculptural things, but the concept of the book really had its origin in some very sort of fundamental ideas that I observed in society, and it was in the late 70s, when there was still a lot of suppression and restrictions in Eastern Europe and South America and everywhere, and it still goes on. And it sort of someday hit me and said, this is really atrocious what we're doing to people's mind, and this censorship issue and forbidding things. And so I, person who likes book, I looked at the book, and the book always has been the target of the censors, has been always singled out as the most prominent issue that the authorities get a hand on. So you can't read, you can't see, you can't do that. And so I had books around, and I took a look at them, and I have to really express something that really severely bothers me, and so that's how it started. And it goes back, I would say, about the late 70s.
But at the same time, you were also doing these colorful prints and the three-dimensional prints.
Exactly, right. And as you indicate, I mean, there's a sense of irony, a sense of kind of a pun humor that comes out of the books at the same time. It is a very serious issue, but I think my language is the sort of ironic look at things, and I do feel that it comes across in all my other work as well as in the books right now. And when you look at my first generation prints, you know, there was a series of things like a flying noodle and an automatic pickle and an electric banana. There was always this kind of contradictions,
again.
yeah. And I believe very strongly there's a tremendous tension and dynamics between opposites. You know, when you talk about organization and chaos, in between there's a suspense, you know, that if you can really dig into, if you look at and polarize situations, and that's what I'm doing in almost all my work.
There's a dynamic energy that's there in that middle place that you're describing.
You just sort of fluff it up by pointing to the two extremes, and I think my language has the two qualities, and I think that brings some of the question you raised earlier about design. I think part of my design thinking is very present in some of the art I do, because there's a certain way of training, a certain way of organizing your visual concepts.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's also very definitely clearly noticeable in the books.
In the books, yeah.
Right.
We're going to see more books, but first we're going to go to your studio on a film we did the other day and look at your environment and then talk a little bit about the first book.
Okay.
Let's do that.
This is probably one of the most important pieces, a key piece in my development to the stage that I'm really involved with at this point very much. This goes back to about 1967. It was a book coming out of the idea of McLuhan's theories about how publishing, how writing, how reading is going to change, and how the new medias are affecting our life in a very different way. The book deals with a sense of the traditional book in that it relates to typographic material. It doesn't have a text as such, it just uses the texture. It is just a nudge against, towards the traditional way of seeing things in a book, but otherwise it's simply a picture book, so to speak. I call it Liber Mobile because it is a movable book, and the idea behind is that one should really work with it rather passively or simply turning pages. As will become clear, we read the book in a very interactive way, as the sort of buzzword is in today's language. When you open the portfolio of the book, you see first a cutout and a disc of type pieces, letters. And then you can read into this storybook by unfolding a series of pages which are basically structured on two principal components. They are type discs that are coming originally from what they call pie type, which used to be type in type shops that was thrown away before it was remelted and cast. The color or texture or the visual characteristics are very intriguing because they really remind of reading, but they are nondescript. It's just pictorial material. Now, in turning this, you become aware that there's a correlation between color, shape, form, line, and also structure. The pages of each one of the discs are scored, so you can actually work into sculptural directions and entertain yourself with this for an endless amount of time. At the same time, you can take these things out, frame them, make pictures, so it is a rather diverse component. In looking at the two principal shapes, you see the half here, which is essentially the base form for the larger type, and then in a second I will show you the base form for the small type. Here again you see the small type disc. Here's a combination of the small and big type composed, and here is the other side running the small type of that. The concept here is that this is a system basically where you have a division of 3 or 4 sections vertically and 3 sections horizontally. So when you start working with this, you can sort of interlace different components horizontally or vertically. You fold the pages along a pre-scored set of lines here, and that allows you to really make completely self-contained forms, and they can be run horizontally across, or you can run them vertically across. And with each base page changed, there's a different sensation. You could take 2 or 3 and build whole structures, which really is a sense, a precursor to my sculptural thinking in almost all my work. When I go through the years I've been doing creative work, there's always a sense of dimensionality. If it's either painting or drawing or print, I always do this in a very subconscious way that dimensionality is part of it. Now, in terms of content, what got me going on this particular book was the time when this was very much discussed was the early 60s, mid-60s, when television and the electronic medias became to really explode in our culture. And McLuhan, a Canadian sort of philosopher and social critic, he really verbalized some of the effects of this quite strongly. And what he talked about, that up to this point we had been living in the culture of the typographic man and the alphabet man, and that this would eventually change. And I think his predictions have come true quite a bit, because principally we are increasingly turning into a pictorial environment of our visual life, and it is sort of the fundamental change, I think, that's underlying the whole area of publishing, of communication, that we are getting away from reading the alphabet as we have known it up to this point. And I think undercurrents, as we can see it, is also the new technology of the digitizing process, where we're really getting away from doing all the information stored up in the alphabet. We store it up in a digital format. So I think like
the beginning of McLuhan's philosophy. He began with Gutenberg's time when the book was invented, the flexible type, the movable type, which really was the onset of the era of the typographic age. And we are, I think, at the end of it at this point. And the new technology, kind of interestingly, again, the technology in the communications field that is changing the social outlook and the social pattern, and will have a far-reaching consequence on the way we will communicate. And I think this is what I find very, very fascinating in terms of the parallel between the traditional book and the book as we see it at this moment. I think this is why this particular piece of work should be really seen at this point, because for my own development it was a key element in the general development of my work, as well as where I'm at the present moment, where I have returned in a sense to the book, but from a different angle. It was the curiosity, and it was the sense of futuristic dialogue that was really the underpinning. And at the moment, I'm really seeing the book in a form where there are two aspects that are fascinating me most. One is the idea of censorship, and then the other part is the principal concept that the book is really going to be a different instrument. And maybe there is where the two elements link together, because here I was concerned with the idea of a different instrument as the book. That it's not a narrative sense, it's not an idea that you sit down and go linear the way the author or the writer has perceived it, but you can go in and out. And I think when we talk about today's technologies, the quality of linear reading is disappearing, particularly in the new angles when we talk about hypertext, where a reader can compose, in terms of text matter, their own beginning, end, and middle phases of a story, of a novel. And I did this at the time just with a visual sense, simply a gesture towards readability by using a typographic language. And then I think this should really this was sort of a beginning of my great interest in the idea of printmaking, where I always have been drawn to, because the print is sort of a very direct method where you work on as an artist, and you have a sense of, it's almost sculpture. Almost most prints in their preparation, there's a very physical activity, and then when you multiply these things, it's a very rewarding quality when you make a wood block and you carve it and you put it on the printing press and you pull off proofs, or you do a linoleum cut or an etching or any of the plates. And there's a very rich quality about the experience in doing this as a creative device. So let me show you some of the prints that followed this, right, or almost parallel to this, when I started doing straight printmaking. This is a phase of my work which is really focused very much on printmaking, and there's a series of images that were dealing still with the concept of communication. These are actual circuit boards from the first generation computers. This particular piece is called Electric Flowers, that sort of grows out of the circuit boards. These things today are like minuscule, very, very small. There's another piece called the Blackout, same thing with computers. A few other images where it goes straight into prints. They are usually either serigraphs or linoleum cuts. This is called color balls. This is called the automatic pickle, and there's another one called the flying noodle. These are sort of periods of my activity with very much into printmaking, and at the same time I was doing sort of systems paintings, which I called systems art, which are manipulative art painting forms.
That was a graph on that print we just started talking about,
Right,
mathematics. But we've just learned a lot about the evolution of the traditional book. Tell me about the course you teach. The Art of the Book, is it?
It's a course called Art of the Book, and what we're doing is essentially taking students or young artists who want to really use the book as a creative, expressive tool, and they come in from sculpture, painting, printmaking, drawing, and use the art of the book course as a forum to bundle ideas and to make books. And what we do there is basically teach them how to construct the book, how to sometimes make their own paper and use the proper materials to make a book.
But not the traditional form of book making, but art book making.
Art book making.
Is it one of a kind?
It's one of a kind or very small editions. You know, it's like maybe they make 3 or 4 copies, 5 copies, and it comes many times out of the typical classical printmaking media. And you know, right now there's a lot of experimentation with the Xerox technique and using copier devices, which are fascinating because that's really the new printmaking format, you know, that has come in. And so it's fascinating.
Paper is important, obviously.
Yeah.
But the written word, that's a whole nother thing. We have to talk about the written word.
Right.
But first, I think we have to take a public service announcement break. We'll be right back.
Art is a process that fills our lives. See it, enjoy it. This public service announcement is brought to you by the Griffis Art Center, New London, Connecticut.
Werner, we left off, welcome back to Art Talk. I'm here with Werner Pfeiffer and we're discussing the art of the book and endangered species. And we've been involved in this conversation about words. Now, what about the written word and language? Where does this all fit into the evolution?
Well, I think I find it very intertwined. I mean, images and words are basically our communication formula. I mean, you look at the classical book, and even look today at television, it's the spoken word and image. It's always word-image relationships that make the sense of communication complete. And I think if we have one only, it's slightly diminished, you know, and it is something that, in fact, we talked about earlier about the course I'm teaching. It's called Art of the Book, Word and Image. That's the two combinations that we really try to address in making books, because I think it's that is how we talk and how we communicate together.
Well, you go back to children's book and how illustration is so much
Exactly.
an important part of.
Well, if you look at the whole evolution of communication, I mean, we had originally the spoken word. You know, there was just, you know, storytelling before any kind of technological communication sense, and then you had the cave drawings, the drawing, the image making. If you look at our language, how it began, the initial communication symbols were little pictures, you know, the pictograms.
Yes,
when
yes,
you go
yes.
back to the
cave drawings.
and it's in a sense ironic what you see today. We are returning to that. When you look at the international language of communication, when you look at some, for example, at international games like the Olympics, or you look at an airport, we're not having words, we have pictures. Everything
Yes.
is done with a pictorial language, you know, they call it design programs, to communicate internationally, because words get, you know, bogged down in the language pockets, you know, so we have to go back to basically using pictures.
Symbols. I remember an artist telling me, you may know Peter, arriving at an airport in Japan.
Right, you know, and I
We
think
need pictures.
we need pictures, and I think this is the kind of strange thing that in the most advanced technological society we've ever lived in, we go back to the origins of making pictures as our communication tools, because we are moving in very international terms,
Yeah.
and you know, the zillions of languages that are being spoken. You can't have every explanation in all these languages, so we use a symbol,
Yeah.
a picture.
Well, you know, it's interesting because the evolution of life, and certainly art, has been from the simple to the complex, but it seems like we're going back in certain areas from the complex to the simple.
I guess it's they sort of bounce forward and back, you know. I think
Yeah.
it's sort of maybe we get sort of so worn out by the complications that we need to have a simplicity, you know, sometimes. you
Yeah,
know.
yeah, and so that's what you're working on. Well, it's all very interesting to me, but you know, art has always been a reflection of the times in which we're living. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Dada art, because Dada art, of course, began in Germany, didn't it?
Right.
And
Germany, Switzerland,
it
France,
was
yeah.
really a provocative form of art. It was a rebellion,
Right.
but it also had an absurdity to it. And so here we've got the same contradiction happening in your work. So do you think of yourself as a Dada?
In some way, I mean, I'm very strong influence, and I have always been fascinated by the group of people who were sort of the originators of Dada, and because it, in many ways, had a similar time frame when it began. It was a rebellion against sort of institutionalizing things and organizing everything into shelves and pockets and groups and
But
so
it was a frustration,
it was a
too,
frustration.
of the system.
Exactly, and
Yeah.
and I think we are experiencing similar things in today's
Yeah.
world. So I think
Yeah.
it's not uncommon that we sort of remind ourselves of this period. And I've been always drawn to their sort of liberal ways of dealing with things. I mean, they were so uninhibited and just did whatever came to their mind. And I
Yeah.
think it's a wonderful period, and it stimulated the 20th century art like enormous way.
Sure,
yeah.
sure. Well, there's a major shift happening for us right now, too, don't you think, with the millennium coming up and a shift, a major
Exactly,
shift.
and I find it very intriguing that, in fact, I think we're almost in a holding pattern in the art world. You know, when you look at the last 10 years, 15 years, there has not been a major stylistic breakthrough.
Yeah, yeah.
And it's almost like we are waiting for this turn of the century thing, this millennium, as you mentioned, you know,
Yeah.
that this triple witching hour where things going to happen about, you know, phasing out of a decade, phasing out of a century, and of a millennium. And I think the kind of signals we get from the art scene in all across the spectrum, writing, you know, music, there's a confusion to a large extent. There's a kind of a questioning, and everybody's holding back, it seems. You know.
Well, there's a lot of the current art that has words as part of the art. Now, what's the message, or do you think artists are trying to have a message included in their work?
Well, I interpret it in a maybe a peculiar way, because I think the word itself is part of an era that I think is almost under duress and coming to an end. I think the word and the language, the way we have it, comes really out of the culture that McLuhan called the alphabet culture. And with this profuse application of language and words, I mean, in painting, in wherever you go, there's a dangling of words. I think it could almost, I see it almost like, is it the end of this alphabet or typographic period?
Yeah.
Because on the other spectrum, we're going into this enormous pictorial environment, television, the videotapes, the entire culture is sort of geared towards looking at things in visual terms rather than verbal terms, and at the same time be sort of juggling these words everywhere. And
so words are becoming endangered,
I think
just as the traditional book is becoming. That's what it's all about.
Right, and I think that sort of brings me to some of the concern in my book, because I think also the way we inflate words. When you look, people say things and they don't mean it. It's all very tangible. Like the political arena, the politicians get up and say things, and they can't mean what they say because it's not doable. And the same thing in some of the theater plays and so on. There's a verbal barrage that is very often meaningless, very confusing. And I think also in a lot of the visual material and graphics and design, if you look at advertising, the kind of false premises that advertising operates on sometimes. They fantasize about the great world with words, and it's not really quite honest. It's all image making. It's all deflating the use and the
Well, advertising. Okay, advertising often gives us a clue to a message, right?
Right.
So let's run our tape of some of the books in your studio, because titles is another thing that, for me, it brings me into what message you're trying to get across. So what's the title of the one we're
This
seeing?
particular piece I call, the previous piece is called Closed Chapter. This is called Taking Aim. This is a slingshot, and there's a closed ball of type pages that are...
There's the irony.
This is called Bolded Shut. It's a stick of wood that runs across, and it's sort of keeping you
With
from...
words taped all over it.
Words taped all
the
over it.
type is
And this is called Corrective Measure. It's a set of screws where you can really tighten down the page and sort of sealing it and make the access impossible. This is called a pebble book. It's simply stones that are mounted on the surface of the page. And this is more a textual thing, the sort of surprise of seeing stones as a thing. This is a knife lying in a book. It's stabbing at a story, and it sort of shows the violence. The same here is a book that has the pages stapled shut, and the actual where the type is, it's all ripped up and torn apart. This piece I call Storyline. It's like a kind of a robe running with all type images running all over, and this sort of nondescript. This is Nailed Shut, reference to the idea of censoring things and keeping them closed, and you just drive nails into a book. This is called Tarred and Feathered. It's a book dipped in tar and stuck into feathers, so you have the idea of that. This is called A Lost Measure. Again, a hint at where culturally, where artistically we're heading. This has no particular title, but it's simply a book tortured and tormented in its position. Same thing here. This has no title. I call it rope books. There's a series of rope books, and they have just rope wrapped around. This is a piece that's beginning. I'm looking at something I want to do with this very pointed sticks, sort of like a thorny issue. So this is sort of a look at that.
Well, I have to ask you about working with the books. What kind of an emotion do you go through when you gesso and plaster a book?
It's a very very peculiar state of mind. What I do is
It must be.
I have to sort of preface it. I get these books that are mostly rejects from libraries and from stores that don't know where to go with them, because there's a lot of damage to them done, and
it's hardbound.
It has to be hardbound books.
Yeah.
And when I start contemplating to do a project with books, I have to almost censor myself not to look at the book, because I love books, and I've come out of this area where I really, if I start opening a book and reveal its soul, its inside, I can't deal with it. So I almost blindfold myself and take a book and just stab it and hammer it and saw it, and usually the first cycle is that I put a glue on these edges to keep it in shape, and then I sort of, the next step is cutting and sawing, or whatever the treatment is or the punishment is for the book.
So you're endangering it. I mean, there's a verb.
Oh, exactly. See, I'm in a sense playing the censor. I'm playing the devil's advocate. Using it as a metaphor to point at the evil of censorship, and many times you have to to use the evil to talk about the evil. You know,
Yeah,
we
yeah.
take a snake's venom to fight a snake's venom. You know, this is
true.
This is
Yeah,
what
yeah,
is
yeah.
generally the cure, and that's what I'm doing. I'm
Yeah.
using basically the book as a symbol in my activity to rattle people out of this complacency that censorship could be acceptable. You know, I don't think it's acceptable in any form. You know, we have to be just very watchful that, you know, censorship is always kept at bay, and I think I feel very strongly about that.
Yeah, obviously, and you're using your artistic energies to give us that message. Yeah.
Right, right. And
Well, you told me something the other day that I'm going to think about for a long time that I didn't know. The Encyclopedia Britannica is on disc.
right, right, and I think we saw it before in the background in my studio. The Encyclopedia Britannica is basically about 140 pounds in weight.
Yeah.
It's 24 volumes, and this is now on a disc that weighs about half an ounce and can be put in an envelope, and it is in fact almost superior in many ways to what you can retract from it, because a lot of the reference points have clues to the music.
Yeah,
They play a little
yeah,
short music,
yeah.
or they have clues to paintings. They show a piece of the painting.
And here's some music, and you know what? We've run out of time. I'm sorry that we've run out of time, but thank you, Werner, for being with us here today. Trudy sends her regards to you, by the way, and thank you, too, for joining us for this week's Art Talk. I hope you've enjoyed visiting Werner's studio and to sharing in this very unusual creative process. Until next time, I'm Patricia Shippee.